Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I am Mariana Manza-Cook, Director of Business Retention and Expansion for the Woodlands Area Economic Development Partnership. I want to thank you all for taking time out of your busy day to join us for our virtual HR Forum series, where we'll be covering a variety of important employment law topics. Today's webinar will be recorded and we will be sharing it as a resource with all of our major employer contacts. We've chosen to present it today as a webinar format, again, to please ask that you participate. Feel comfortable to add your questions to our presenters in the Q&A box throughout our meeting. I'd like to begin by introducing our moderator for this session, Holly Gurry. Holly has been with the Woodlands Area Economic Development Partnership since 1999. And she serves as our Chief Operating Officer. In this position, she's responsible for day-to-day operations of the organization. This includes managing our organization's staff, budget, accounting processes, and functions. She also serves as our HR administrator, which is why I've asked her to participate in our forum today. Thank you, Holly. Kick it to you.
Yes, thank you and hello everyone. As Mariana said, I am Holly Gruey. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at the Woodlands Area EDP. Thank you so much to our presenter today, Christina Frankel, for covering today's forum topic, the Great Resignation, labor shortages, and unemployment claims. Christina is of counsel at one of our valued partner organizations, the Strong Firm. She specializes in the practice of labor and employment law issues, and we appreciate the presentation she's put together today and is going to share with us. With that, I will turn the mic over to Christina.
Great. Well, thank you, ladies, and thanks everyone for being here. And I'll just dive right in. So yes, as Holly mentioned, I'm talking about the Great Resignation, labor shortages, and unemployment claims. Okay, so this first slide is just a disclaimer that this is not legal advice. And as mentioned, I'm at the Strong Firm. The Strong Firm is a boutique firm here in the Woodlands, and we do just about all of it: real estate, business, oil, gas, and energy, employment, business mediation. This is me. Yep, I went to Washington University in St. Louis and got my law degree at U of H. Okay, so let's dive right in with unemployment. So I wanted to start with the history and purpose of unemployment, which of course we all know, but sometimes I think when we are in the weeds of fighting these claims, we forget that the purpose of unemployment was really a safety net. Of course, losing one's job is a crisis for a family that often creates crisis for a community. So that is the purpose. Generally, states administer the program, but the federal government oversees compliance. So who is a covered employee? The threshold requirement to draw benefits is that the individual is out of work through no fault of their own. Employees must also be available to work and actively be looking for work. Okay, the definition of an employer. An employer is covered under the Texas Unemployment Compensation Act if in the current or preceding calendar year, the employer paid wages of $1,500 or more during a calendar quarter, or the employer employed at least one individual for a portion of at least one day during 20 or more calendar weeks. And what I want to point out here is how sort of generous of a definition of employer that is. That covers a lot of people, including, arguably households where, if you have a housekeeper or a nanny, you might meet the definition of an employer. Benefits. The TWC determines the weekly benefit amount by dividing earnings for the highest paid quarter for the base period by 25 up to a maximum of 521 per week. Benefits are available for 26 weeks. Now, I'm sure everybody knows here that during the height of COVID, there were several laws that extended these benefits. State laws, federal laws, lots of ways that people could get extended benefits. Most, if not all of those programs have expired. I believe the last extension expired earlier in September. So at this point, we're back to sort of square one. Disqualifications. All right, so what would disqualify a claimant from receiving benefits? Claimants are disqualified for the following reasons. Discharge for misconduct conducted to the work. So this is where a lot of our discussion comes in. What is misconduct? Also, if you voluntarily quit for personal reasons, then you disqualify yourself for unemployment. Refusal of suitable work without good cause. Work stoppage resulting from participation in a labor dispute while that labor dispute is ongoing. Receipt of severance pay / wages in lieu of notice, again, during the period that you are receiving those benefits. Receipt of workers' compensation benefits, again, while receiving benefits. And then pension. Pension is complicated and definitely worth kind of looking over the statute if that applies in your situation. All right, so misconduct. This is where the bulk of our discussion usually is when I'm called to help with unemployment claims. The Texas Labor Code defines misconduct as mismanagement of a position of employment by action or inaction, neglect that jeopardizes the life or property of another, intentional wrongdoing or malfeasance, intentional violation of a law or a violation of policy or rule adopted to ensure the orderly work and the safety of employees, but does not include an act in response to an unconscionable act of an employer or supervisor. So that's sort of a meaty definition that the TWC has broken down into something that the claimant did or failed to do that caused a problem for the company, was in violation of a rule, policy, or law, and was within the claimant's power to control or avoid. So let's look at some examples. Here are examples where courts or agencies determined that the claimant was disqualified for benefits based on their misconduct. All right, so a Dallas court found misconduct when an employee had been warned 3 times about the misfiling of orders and continued to do it. Employees' failure to fully and truthfully assist in an employer investigation constituted intentional wrongdoing. Hospital employee was fired after pleading guilty to an aggravated assault. And importantly, there was a company policy on point. So in that case, they found that there was a violation of policy. Repeated and egregious violation of attendance policy after multiple warnings. Theft of employer property. Refusing to do work at the agreed rate constituted insubordination. Sleeping on the job constituted misconduct, which makes sense. And a profane-laden outburst at coworkers or a supervisor, that they found misconduct. Okay, so behavior that does not meet the definition of misconduct. Missing work for personal and/or family member illnesses. In this case, the employee repeatedly updated the employer about his or her situation. So I'm sure we can all think of that situation where an employee continually calls in, misses work, but they are letting you know what's going on. Here, feel free to fire them, but it doesn't necessarily mean they will be disqualified for unemployment benefits. Individuals' inability to learn a job or increase productivity. If they were just a bad hire, that does not meet the definition of misconduct. Being unliked by coworkers, supervisors, or customers. The TWC says if you were just, generally a difficult personality and nobody wanted you around, again, that doesn't mean you keep your job, but it doesn't meet the definition of misconduct that will disqualify you from getting unemployment. Employees' poor performance / just bad at their job. I think this is sort of the bulk of the reason most people lose their job, and that does not meet the definition of misconduct. All right. The TWC has some examples of things that employers say when arguing misconduct, and they're just saying avoid these pitfalls. Failing to give warning prior to termination. Inconsistent discipline between 2 similarly situated employees. So as an employment lawyer, I'm sure you have heard this before. I've probably said it before, which is that 2 similarly situated employees need to be treated similarly. Anytime there's a big difference in treatment between 2 employees, that makes people nervous. Failing to follow company's written disciplinary policy. explaining that the claimant was fired for an accumulation as opposed to one specific incident. And that makes sense, right? Because if you're arguing, oh, this incident was so bad, it constituted misconduct, but then you also say to the TWC, but it was actually just a bunch of little things. Well, what you really need to show is it was one big event that led to the firing. Suggesting that the termination was based on the personality dispute, that just harkens back to what we said before, that simply being unlikable does not meet the definition of misconduct. And failing to provide witnesses or documentation. You know, just in general, make sure you have your ducks in a row when you're trying to fight these things. Large time gap between incident and termination, which again makes sense. If you're trying to argue that the mistake was so great it led to termination, well, and then you let several weeks go by, it feels like that wasn't the true reason that you fired the employee. Okay, the other big one, voluntarily quit. You know, sort of the lore out there is that if you quit, you are not entitled to benefits. Well, that's not entirely true. An individual is disqualified from unemployment benefits if they left work without good cause. The TWC defines good cause as such cause related to work as would cause a person who was genuinely interested in retaining work to nevertheless leave the job. The employee has the burden of proving that he quit for good cause. Okay, quit. In order to deny an unemployment claim based on resignation, employers should be able to show three things. They left voluntarily while work was still available. The employee left for personal reasons or work reasons that a reasonable employee would not have left over. And they quit before the employer had the opportunity to remedy the situation. Right, so essentially what we're looking for is, was this truly voluntary, or did the employer leave the employee with no choices? Were they essentially forced to quit? Common mistakes around quitting. Not inquiring as to why the employee quit, failing to take an employee's complaints seriously, right? And again, you can imagine that situation where an employee continually comes with some concerns, the employer does nothing, does nothing, does nothing. Eventually, an employee feels forced to quit. Failing to correct problems, similarly, allowing harassment to go unchecked, same idea. If there's a lot going on in the workplace and employer is not remedying the situation, well, then an employee might feel they have no choice but to quit. Multiple adverse employment actions at once, a reduction in hours, reduction in hourly wage, loss in benefits. A reasonable employee would quit, right? If all of a sudden your job was one thing and then it becomes something else, it is likely that they will find that wasn't a true voluntary quit. Okay, phrases that will undermine the idea that the employee quit. Basically, what we're looking for here is whether or not this was truly quitting or if you were essentially fired but said you quit, right? So employers say things like, well, we asked for the employee's resignation, or we told the employee to resign. We wanted the employee to resign. We are happy the employee resigned. If the employee hadn't quit, I would have fired him or her, right? This all goes to the idea that this was not really quitting. They were forced out. Okay, and before we sort of move on, it is worth thinking about, why do we care, right? Why fight unemployment claims? I often get calls from employers who get real worked up when an ex-employee files unemployment. And I do understand it. It feels a little personal. But I think as an organization, you definitely need to consider whether it makes sense to fight these claims. And, you know, I don't have a statistic for you, but I do have lots of anecdotal evidence that sometimes fighting these claims leads to other employment problems, right? Charges of discrimination, things of that nature. I can think of a couple examples where the employer really, really didn't want this ex-employee to get benefits. So everybody fought, they got their ducks in a row, they had unemployment claims denied, everybody high-fived, only then for a few weeks later to receive that charge of discrimination. So, you know, it is worth thinking about. Chargebacks, and this, I won't get into the details, it's a complicated system, but the amount of benefits paid to a claimant for a benefit year shall be charged the account of the claim's employer during the base period. So it does financially impact the employer, but not quite as much as that people think. All right, so let's talk a little bit about process. If you get a notice of application for unemployment, what do? Like everything these days, it is probably easiest to respond online. They do limit the amount of times you can attempt to do this, so it's something to kind of have your ducks in a row before you get started. First of all, look for fraudulent claims. While the unemployment extended benefits were happening, there was a real uptick in fraudulent unemployment. So the first thing to look at is, did the employee ever work for you? The second thing to look for is, are they still working for you? I mean, again, there was lots of examples where people had jobs and thought, hey, let's just give it a whirl and see if I can get some unemployment benefits. Verify that all the information on the separation page is accurate, basically just to, double check all of that. And then provide work separation details. There's several categories. Was it a permanent layoff, a temporary layoff? Were they fired, quit, reduction in hours? Make sure to fill out all that correctly. And double check all information provided. You actually cannot change answers once they are submitted. The appeal process. File all appeals in a timely manner. An untimely appeal may result in a finding for the employee, just straight up. Be prepared again with witnesses and documents. All right, so that's my spiel on unemployment, and now we're going to get into the labor shortage, which I just feel is all over the news. You cannot open a newspaper, listen to TV without hearing about this labor shortage. So let's get into it. The current status of unemployment. Some noteworthy headlines, and again, you can find these anywhere. There's always something new and noteworthy with this topic. The workforce has 5 million less employees than it did before the pandemic. 67% of small businesses reported trying to hire. 42% of those businesses reported raising compensation in order to entice applicants. 51% of those businesses still have openings they cannot fill. So technically, this is not a labor shortage. And that is because as of June 2021, 9.5 million people were unemployed, but 9.2 million job openings existed. So the numbers do not suggest a shortage. There are plenty of people to work these jobs. The issue is that it doesn't appear to be the right people in the right jobs. Many believe that the extended unemployment benefits were responsible for the labor shortage, right? And there is some common sense appeal to that argument, that if people were getting paid to stay home, they would continue to stay home and not re-enter the job market. It's a little too soon to say if that is true, but the majority of the extended benefits expired in September, and so far there does not appear to be a huge increase in the number of applicants and people rejoining the workforce. Again, it's new. There's also some idea that it's possible with some of the stimulus money that was out there that people have a larger safety net than they've had before, and so some of that will run out soon, and then perhaps people will rejoin the workforce. In a recent survey by the Society of Human Resources Management, only 11% of respondents said that extended unemployment made it possible for them to be more selective in their job hunt. So who is leaving? Interestingly, I assumed that it would be entry-level positions, but that's not really where we see the majority of resignations. It is mid-level employees. The resignations jumped the most for the 35 to 45-year-old age group. So why? There's lots of reasons, and some of these are a little bit speculative at this point. One reason that people are coming up with is that is the age group of people that you want to poach, right? So when we think of the resignation, We might think, well, they leave the workforce entirely, but that's also not what's going on. Sometimes they're just leaving your organization and going elsewhere. So that would make sense for the mid-level employees, right? They're the people that are good at their job, they know what they're doing, and they're ready to jump ship, and another company comes in and poaches them. Also, that age group might have more financial security to make a change, whereas with your entry-level folks, they might just not be ready to make a move, financially ready to give it some time, not in the workforce. And then also, of course, maybe the life stage of 35 to 45-year-old people. That's, when you are busy with children and your parents and everything's happening, that maybe this pandemic was particularly hard for that age group. Skills gap. One thing that continues to be an issue is this idea of a skills gap. In a survey, 60% of employers said that they cannot find workers with the skills they need. 30% of applicants say there are no jobs for the skills they possess, right? So that gets back a little bit to our idea that there's all these unemployed people and there's all these job openings, but they are not overlapping. So that could be one of the reasons is that there's this large skills gap. The pandemic sped this problem up. Many companies embraced technology in order to make it through the pandemic, right? In order to allow remote work, and they really brought some new equipment in, and now they cannot find enough workers with the skill set to use that technology. Hard hit industries. Not surprisingly, low wage industries have been hit the hardest. Retail and hospitality have been particularly hit hard. That type of work is difficult and it requires long, challenging hours. So, that's tough work. That's tough work. And we hear, a lot of, especially in the hospitality industry, that they are working while everybody else is playing, which is a tough job. As other industries are also desperate for workers, some of those industries are plucking some of these former sort of retail hospitality staff to come in and put them in sort of administrative type jobs, which just might, for some, be a better working environment. Healthcare has also been hit hard. That is likely caused by burnout, as of course, the last 20 months have been very hard on the healthcare industry. Okay, so what can you do? So some advice is to actually look and see, is this a problem for you, right? Sometimes it feels like when the news is screaming about an issue, you assume it's a problem in your actual life, but it's worth considering, is that true? Look at your own companies, your own workforce. Has there been a great resignation? Are people sort of running for the doors? And if they are, then we need to really quantify the data. Who is left? What industries? Why are they leaving? And, really think through that, maybe through exit interviews, or possibly look at the numbers. And are they saying it's because of wages? Are they saying it's because of bonuses? Are they saying it's because they don't want to come back into the office? Are they saying it's, benefits, right? Really try to figure out, A, is it a problem? And then if it is, who is leaving and why? Possible solutions: focus on retention. Create a positive work culture, which, I know is easier said than done, but the more you can create an environment where employees want to stay, the better it is for the employer and the employee. Even employers looking to hire low-wage people are offering a lot of incentives, hourly pay, signing bonuses, so we might have to get creative in terms of how to entice applicants. Some employers are paying to reskill employees. I think, that's something that we might have to really think about in terms of trade schools. And if that skills gap is true, if you just are looking into your applicant pool and nobody has the skills you need, well, then maybe you get your folks that you currently have into some reskill programs. Some employers are having good luck with referral programs. Obviously that's when you have your current employees say, hey, listen, if you can bring somebody and they last, 30, 60, 90 days, you'll get this bonus. If your company has transitioned to a remote working environment, you can cast a wider geographical net, right? All of a sudden, it doesn't matter if they live directly in the community. It's possible that they can work a little farther from your workforce. cultivate relationships with high schools and trade schools. Now that's a good idea to kind of get them in the entry level positions, and then you can retain that workforce. Okay, so looking forward, well, I wish I could leave you with some good news, but unfortunately, they're saying that the labor shortages are not expected to go away anytime soon. So the baby boomer population, a lot of the chatter around this labor shortage is this idea of, young folks just sitting out, maybe perhaps collecting unemployment. Then again, as we talked about, these mid-level employees that are getting poached. But another component here is that we have a large baby boomer population that is exiting the workforce. This is it, they're getting out. So we need more people to replace them. And that problem is not going away anytime soon. And then for better or worse, this may speed up automation in certain industries. I think pre-pandemic, as employment lawyers, what we heard a lot about was automation, right? How is automation going to affect, not just the workforce, but the world at large? There's lots of chatter about automation. And now there is some thought that this will speed up that process, right? And you can think of examples like in the grocery store or waitresses, that instead, if you can't hire waitresses, you can certainly buy iPads to sit on the table and have that technology collect the order. So that is something that we should consider. Okay, so that is my presentation, and I look forward to some questions.
Well, Christina, thank you for this valuable information, and we would like to end with some Q&A on the topics.
Sure.
Start with some questions that we have in advance, and then we welcome any questions from our attendees. They can just submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of their screen, and then we will start with a few and see if we get any more.
Okay.
What is the current status of CARES Act unemployment benefits, and is there additional federal unemployment aid coming down the pipeline?
Sure. So the CARES Act has expired. I don't have the exact dates in front of me. I believe it originally was set to expire in December 2020. They extended it through March. I believe some states, perhaps all the states, there was an additional extension through September. But my understanding is at this point, all the extended benefits have expired. In terms of whether or not additional help is coming, there's certainly nothing in the works now. I'm sure if you've watched the news, there's lots of talk about whether or not Congress is going to pass an additional bill. There has been some talk that additional benefits will be in there, but nothing firm yet.
Okay, very good. So we talked a little bit about, we talked about mandates last week and things like that. And out of just curiosity, if an employee does not follow a required mandate, how would an employer treat that infraction? For example, if they violate a vaccination or a quarantine or other COVID guidelines, would that play into whether they received the benefits for unemployment and misconduct and things like that?
Sure. Yep. Great question. Well, I'm sure your panelists last week when talking about the vaccine mandate give the big caveat that this is all brand new law. And so it is brand new and it is ever changing. The current belief is that if you violate an employer mandate, that is violating a company policy. So as of now, most people think that if you refuse to, you refuse to get a vaccine, you refuse to quarantine after your employer asks you, any sort of COVID related employer mandates, as of now, the current thinking is that that would disqualify you from unemployment because you violated a company policy. Now, the TWC has declined to make a blanket rule. The TWC said, like everything, it's a fact by fact. Facts are important and they're going to look at everything closely and every situation is different. But the general thought is that refusing a mandate is refusing an employer policy and you will be disqualified from unemployment.
Okay, great to know. The third one is, if you kind of mentioned about the automation of lower skilled jobs, if those become replaced, how important do you think the role of education and certification programs will be for workers needing new jobs?
Yes, I think that's going to become very important. That's easier said than done though, right? I think we have a tendency to think, well, if one job goes away, we can find a new job for an employee and make sure that they're trained and that they take that job. And that certainly is the policy and ultimately maybe is the goal. But to that individual employee, that might feel a little jarring, right? If you are, a waitress and then someone says, well, now we're going to reskill you and become a mechanic, for that individual employee, that might become a little jarring. But I think in general, that is probably the way we're going to go, and that jobs are going to change, and it's going to require a lot of education to kind of get people back up to speed.
Okay, very good. Mariana, I'm going to kick it to you. I don't see any other questions in the chat box. So apparently, Christina, you did a wonderful job explaining everything, and hopefully these few questions that we received in advance help clarify some information and give some perspective.
Thank you so much to both of you for your help today. We do have Christina's information here. We'll also be following up, sharing this and a recording of today's webinar so that you can pass this along. Our hope is to other colleagues that might be interested on this topic. So thank you again for your time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you to everyone, and especially to our partners at the Strong Firm for your time today. The EDP is proud to host meetings like this and throughout the year. If your organization is not already a member of EDP and you're interested in becoming a partner, please feel free to reach out to us for details, and we'll take care, and hopefully we'll see you next week.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.